So thank you, Sam, and thank you, David. I got into low glycemic load eating back in the late 80s. So it's a tremendous delight to see that we're recognizing that sugar is one of the greatest evils, really. It's done such damage. I've written 46 books. One of them happens to be the Alzheimer's Prevention Plan, written in 2005. And I'm here to show you that Alzheimer's is a preventable disease, largely, in just the same way that type 2 diabetes is, but the drivers are not all the same. So I'm honored to have a wonderful team of scientific advisors in our charity. We have Professor David Smith. He was the Vice Dean, in effect, of Oxford University School of Medicine. We have Professor Jintai Yu, who I will introduce you to, from Fudan University, a superb scientist. We have Professor Peter Garrard. He's an excellent neurologist, and many others who we've brought in with very specific functions that relate to Alzheimer's, which I'm going to elaborate as we go through. You see, the problem is that every 3 seconds, somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's. That's what we're dealing with. And in the UK, we're talking about 790 people a day. In other words, 7 double-deckers worth of people diagnosed with something which I hope you will start to realize is a preventable disease. In case you don't know, pre-dementia or mild cognitive impairment and dementia are diagnosed by means of a cognitive function test that looks at some very specific changes in cognition. And these changes actually occur 40 years before a diagnosis. Back in 2015, we developed a free, online, accurate, validated cognitive function test, as good as any that you will get in a memory clinic. And we've tested over 400,000 people. About 100 people a day are doing this test. Now, Alzheimer's can only be diagnosed by having both a loss of cognitive function and a shrinkage of the medial temporal lobe, the central area of the brain. And the scan that is used globally to diagnose Alzheimer's was developed by Professor David Smith's team at Oxford University. And to make this real, what we have here is 2 people who have an MRI scan at 6 monthly intervals, and one is superimposed over the other. On the left, you see no change. On the right, what you see in black are the loss of dead cells. Now, type 2 diabetes is reversible, but when you've lost part of your brain, it is not reversible. That is why we need to make Britain dementia unfriendly. This is something that has to be dealt with before people get into the Alzheimer's category. Now, it turns out that the person on the right had a homocysteine level of 13.1, while the control person on the left, a homocysteine of 7.8. And this is very significant because once homocysteine, which I'm going to explain, which in effect is a marker of B vitamin status, goes above 11.5, you have accelerated brain shrinkage. And that is really what Alzheimer's is, physiologically speaking, pathologically speaking. In people 70 plus, you get about 0.5% of total brain shrinkage a year, but no measurable loss in cognitive function. In mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, it's about 1% a year. Total brain shrinkage. In Alzheimer's, it's about 2.5% a year. Now, if we scanned people very early, we would start to see those changes about 40 years before a person has a diagnosis. So let us understand that mild cognitive impairment is not mild. You're already 70% or 80% along the disease process. So we really need to start testing people from the age of 40 if we want to significantly prevent this condition, and certainly from 50. Now, last year there was a study which showed that small increases in blood glucose within the normal range, so not diagnosing you with diabetes or pre-diabetes, already confers a 15% increased risk of dementia in people in young adulthood. So we're talking age 35 plus. Simply the glucose level is already predicting risk for dementia. In adolescents with metabolic syndrome, and of course we know it's driven by sugar and refined carbohydrates, we are already seeing both reduction in cognitive function and reduction in hippocampal volume. That is part of the medial temporal lobe. Alzheimer's represents approximately 2/3 of dementia diagnoses. And the next big chunk is vascular dementia, but the drivers for vascular dementia are just the same as the drivers for Alzheimer's. And then the next chunk is mixed dementia, which usually means vascular and Alzheimer's. So actually, we are looking at something like 89% of all dementia diagnoses are preventable, are driven by the same factors, some of which I'm going to show you because we are a little bit limited in time. Now, one of the big myths, as we heard in relation to cancer, is that it's in the genes. And if you stop someone in the street and say how much of Alzheimer's is genetic, they'll probably say 30% or 50%. The answer is actually closer to 0.5%. So in terms of actual causative genes, and we're talking here about APP and the presenilin genes, it's less than 1 in 100 people who will develop Alzheimer's as a consequence of those genes. And this Alzheimer's will develop in their 50s or 60s and be very, very prevalent in the family. In other words, if you've got a lot of relatives who are developing Alzheimer's very early on in life, you should get checked for this gene. Now, of course, there are genes, we've heard about ApoE4, for example, which do not cause Alzheimer's, but they do increase your risk. And as you know, genes exert their effect through epigenetics. So it's not just the gene, but the environment of the gene. So it's pretty much established now that at least half of the risk of Alzheimer's are things that we can modify, things that we can do something about. 1% or less is causative genes. One of the mistakes is people think, therefore, the other chunk must be a combination of predisposing genes like ApoE4. If you happen to have that polymorphism, statistically, it will increase your risk of developing Alzheimer's by 4 to 6%. However, something very interesting occurs. In all the decent studies, all the big randomized trials, etc., of course, they've measured ApoE4 status, which occurs in something like 1/4 of people in studies. And also, certainly in the B vitamin-related studies, they will have measured a polymorphism in one of the methylation genes called methyl tetrahydrofolate 677TT, MTHFR 67TT. And statistically, if you have that gene, you have a greater risk of Alzheimer's. However, what I've done is to look at all the studies that have changed diet or given B vitamins or given omegas, and it really makes no difference whether you have the genes. So in a sense, this is quite an interesting study in this respect. It just came out in the British Medical Journal, 29,000 people. And what it found is that those who had a healthy diet were about 7 times less likely to have age-related cognitive decline than those with an average diet, and 9 times less likely to develop dementia than those with an unfavorable diet. And one of the things that was quite interesting in this, and this is not because I'm not a fan of exercise, I totally am, but the effect of the diet was about twice as important as the next biggest risk factor, which was exercise. Whether or not you had ApoE4 made absolutely no difference at all. The other big trial that's going on that is multifactorial and very respected and very well done is the FINGER trial. And they're changing lots of different factors that are risk factors. But once again, whether or not you are ApoE4 makes no difference. So these predisposing genes are like a weak light. And when you shine the strong light of changing a person's diet and lifestyle, they really have no effect. So we've got to understand that this is a disease of things that we do. Now, some of you may remember the book, The Tao of Physics, written by the great systems thinker, physicist Fritjof Capra, who I happened to be playing tennis with when I was 15. And he said to me, Patrick, what is the difference between an animate object and an inanimate object, between you and a bicycle? And he said, both have parts. Those parts relate. It's like our organs. We have a department for each of our organs, and they relate. And the chain is connected to the wheel and so on. But the difference in an animate object is there is this life flowing through it. So if we think of that in terms of the structure of the brain and its function and its utilization, something rather magical happens, which is all the apparently disparate risks that are established for Alzheimer's fall very neatly into something that affects structure, like omega-3, for example, which I'm going to show you, or head trauma, or function, for example, the glucose metabolism or ketone metabolism, or the mopping up of the exhaust fumes. We're talking here about antioxidant status or the circulation. That would all be part of function. And then utilization. So you've been reading recently of the studies that show that if you are deaf or blind, you're probably going to end up dumb unless you have a hearing aid. In other words, hearing loss is a risk factor, and it's reduced by having a hearing aid. If you have cataracts, that is a risk factor for dementia, and it's reduced if you have cataract surgery. In other words, it's not just about having a healthy brain. It's not just about having a good sort of metabolic supply. If you don't use it, you lose it. And it's that stimulation through the senses, the social, intellectual, and physical active lifestyle that makes all the difference. Now, what we did a few years ago, having established that the cognitive function test worked, is develop a rudimentary questionnaire that people could fill in about their diet and lifestyle and gave them advice about things to change. And we then employed NHS and UCL researchers. Professor Claudia Cooper was one of those, to do a qualitative study on 5,000 people who had been through our program. And we were very pleased, of course, that 88% found it useful and 37% made changes. But to be honest, the reason for doing the research was to understand the barriers to change. Because it's not just, what makes a difference, it's how do you get someone to change their behaviors. And we learned about trust. People don't trust this information. They need to trust the source of the advice that they're getting. Most people don't want to take the test. And if you ask them why, they'll say, well, I don't want to know, because there's nothing you can do about it, which is very, very far from the truth. So we are kind of dealing with how to change the ostrich phenomenon. Now, it just so happens that if you look at all the risk factors, you can fit them into 8 domains, as we call them. So you've been hearing a lot this morning about low carbs and glycemic load. I'm going to talk a little bit about brain fats, omega-3 and vitamin D, B vitamins and homocysteine, antioxidants we won't have much time to talk about, and the healthy gut, neither, active body, active mind, stress and sleep. And one of the best meta-analyses of all was done by the wonderful scientist, Professor Jintai Yu in China. China are really leading the way in the research on dementia, and quite rightly, because they've got 176 million people over the age of 65. So they're heading for a silver tsunami, if any country is. And what's rather lovely about his research and meta-analysis of 396 trials, including 156 RCTs, on Alzheimer's and modifiable factors, in which he concludes that homocysteine-lowering treatment seems the most promising intervention for Alzheimer's disease. So that is like number one. But what's also rather lovely about the way this graph is portrayed, which shows the things across your lifestyle that would have to happen to you, or that you'd have to do or not do to have risk for Alzheimer's, is the further you are away from the dotted line, the greater is the risk. So we're talking here about odds ratio. So if you go up the top, having diabetes or being depressed or having high homocysteine confers a big extra risk. And the green dots mean that the evidence is level 1. And down the bottom, you can see that cognitive activity is, the more cognitive activity, the less the risk, and the evidence is very good. So we really like his approach. And our approach, by the way, is to look at how prevalent is the problem in an older population. So we're talking about 30% of those over 40 will have a level of homocysteine at the point that causes accelerated brain shrinkage. And it attributes, the population attributable risk is 18%. It's easy to change, and the evidence is very strong. So this is how we sort of weigh in. Smoking, on the other hand, if you go to a 65-plus population, only 8% of people smoke. Now, if you do smoke and you do reduce the risk, that's great. It attributes 13% of the population attributable risk. It's moderately easy to change. and the evidence is strong. So this is how we kind of assess where, what gives the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. Because of the time we have, I'm going to focus on two of the strong players, which is B vitamins that lower homocysteine and omega-3. And there's very good reason for this, because the team at the National Institute of Health attribute 22% of the population attributable risk to raised homocysteine, lack of B vitamins, largely to do with the malabsorption of B12. It's not really so much about diet in this case, it's about absorption capacity. And 22% to raised lack of omega-3 and lack of seafood. Now, you can't merge those two together and say 44% because there's a lot of overlap. But I think we could reasonably say that 1/3 of all of the risk of Alzheimer's is attributed to two things only, which is omega-3 and B vitamins. However, here in the UK, we tend to default to the Livingston-Lancet Commission. And this is a very strange piece of literature. It's excellent in many respects, except in every iteration since 2017, having been sent by numerous scientists, including Professor David Smith, all the RCTs on B vitamins and homocysteine, which Jintai Yu, professor, rates as the top level of evidence. Jill Livingston, has managed to completely ignore it at every single iteration. So it's just not there, right? And you as a doctor probably don't even really know about it because no one's teaching you, but the evidence is absolutely rock solid. We, of course, have looked at all of the meta-analyses that exist, which don't have this extraordinary exclusion. And recently I was asking Professor Jill Livingston, why not? She says, oh, well, not many people have a raised homocysteine, do they? And this, of course, is a completely false statement because I'm 65 and at my age group, about 50% of people will have a homocysteine above the level that we know causes accelerated brain shrinkage. So it is actually extremely common. And we should, and by the way, the reason I got started on all this was in 2010 when Professor David Smith did his original RCT work, which I'm going to show you. I said, now what? I'll show you the results. And he said, well, I hope within 5 years it will be standard NHS policy. And I said, what would it be? And he said, screen everyone for cognitive function from the age of 50. If not good, measure the homocysteine. If above 11, give the B vitamins. And we had that strategy costed by Oxford University's health economists. And the saving across the EU with moderate compliance would be 60 billion euros in 5 years. So this is a very easy thing to do. But you probably know as a doctor, it's incredibly hard to get your homocysteine level measured. How do you do this? We are introducing on July the 1st, a single pinprick blood test for HbA1c, homocysteine, vitamin D, and omega-3 that anyone can do at low cost. So this is what got me excited. Professor David Smith takes a couple of hundred people diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. And let's just pretend for a minute that nothing's happening and we're just looking at the blue, which is the placebo group. He measures their rate of brain atrophy over a year, and he measures their homocysteine level. And those in the top quarter for homocysteine have a much greater rate of brain shrinkage than those in the bottom quarter. It's a linear effect. Now, actually what happens is half of the group are given B vitamins, but I'm not talking about RDAs here, ridiculous dietary arbitraries. I'm talking about 500 microgram of vitamin B12. The RDA, or now the reference nutrient intake, is 1.5 microgram. Now, you and I don't need 500 micrograms, but if you are not absorbing B12, which happens to so many people, approximately 2 in 5 over 60, you need to supplement a lot more to get a little in. It's cheap and it's safe. So he gave them 500 micrograms of B12, 800 microgram of folate, folic acid, and also 20 milligrams of B6. And as you can see, the rate of brain shrinkage, especially in that quarter who started with high homocysteine, was actually a lot less, 53% less. And what this means in real terms, on the left you see someone in the placebo group, and this is a different kind of scan, so it's the top of the spinal cord, not empty space. And in that central region you can see turquoise, which is where brain cells have died, so it's the loss of brain matter. The total atrophy of the brain in 1 year was 2.5%. The homocysteine went up from 22 to 30. That's the placebo group. On the right, you have somebody on the active B vitamin group. There is no turquoise. The rate of brain shrinkage is 0.46%. Below, that is the level you see in people with no cognitive decline, and the homocysteine goes down from 24 to 12. And in the specific areas of the brain where you get the most shrinkage in Alzheimer's, there was just under 9 times less shrinkage in the group of the B vitamins versus the placebo. And really what we can say now is homocysteine is causal. It's not just a marker. If you have increased B vitamins, especially B12, you get a lower homocysteine level. This prevents regional gray matter atrophy. It improves the clinical dementia rating CDR score, and it slows cognitive decline on MMSE. So it's not just a marker, it's actually part of the problem. Now, what David Smith started to realize is that that neuronal membrane, that channel through which all our communication occurs, all our thinking and feeling and dreaming, is composed of principally DHA, omega-3 DHA, also arachidonic acid, which has to attach to phospholipids. These are the blobby bits. And they are found very rich in fish and also in eggs. And the attachment is done by methylation, which depends on B vitamins. And if you're not doing methylation, your homocysteine goes up. Now, I'd like to contextualize this for you. I live in South Wales, and down there on the Gower Peninsula, a decade or so ago, they found an ancient Homo sapiens. Originally thought to be a woman from all the ornaments on the skeleton, but it turned out to be a man, the Paviland man. And when they analyzed the bones of the Paviland man, approximately a quarter of their diet was from marine food. Now, I can't really detour into this, but I'm totally convinced that we became Homo sapiens because we are the aquatic ape, the waterside ape. We are the group of apes who started to exploit wetlands, swamplands, estuaries, started to wade in water, became upright. And David Attenborough kind of helped the clincher on this because he said human babies are born with a waxy waterproof layer, the vernix. I have never seen a vernix in any land-based mammal. I wonder if the same thing occurs in the sea mammals like seals and sea lions. You probably know that dolphins have every bone in our hands and arms in their flippers. So if you watch their fetal evolution, they're like us, but it just sort of shrank. And sure enough, a French-Canadian marine biologist took this up, and it is true. Seals and sea lions have exactly the same vernix us humans do. No land-based mammals have this. The point of this is one has to assume the Paviland man was burning off at least double the calories hunting and gathering. And what that would mean today is that half of our entire diet would have to be marine food to get the same kind of intake of omega-3 DHA, of phospholipids, of B12, of iodine, of selenium, of zinc, and other such essential brain nutrients. In other words, evolution has driven our brain. And in fact, it is that combination of phosphorylated DHA, DHA attached to phospholipids, that is such an exquisite predictor of the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And this, by the way, is the chart that showed what was given in David Smith's studies and actually has been replicated in many other studies. So we're not talking about reference nutrient intakes. And in fact, it is very clear that the intake of a nutrient that you need is very simply the level that relieves the symptoms. And we see brain shrinkage in people with B12, serum B12s, in the normal range. Just in the same way that slightly raised glucose, but within the reference range, already predicts dementia. So we're being slightly misguided by our standards. Two good studies have come out, and one actually just happened in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition by someone called Wei, W-E-I. By the way, I have created foodforthebrain.org/PHC references. So every reference I'm referring to is there, and you can click on it and you can go to the paper. And this new paper shows that anyone who has a raised omega-3 in the blood, supplements fish oils, or eats lots of fish has a 20% reduced risk of dementia. This particular study, Chinese, using UK Biobank data, finds that those supplementing omega-3 fish oils have a 9% reduced risk of dementia. So this prompted, I mean, this didn't, because we're talking, this came later, but this way of thinking prompted David Smith and his group to go back to their baseline blood samples to look at and explore whether the omega-3 status in the plasma changed the effect of the B vitamins. So they split the participant group into tertiles, into thirds, and found that the third, the lowest omega-3 status, had no benefit at all from the B vitamins. But the third in the highest tertile had not the 53% less brain shrinkage of the whole, previously published, highly statistically significant, but 73% less brain shrinkage. And that brought them down to the level of shrinkage that you see in people with no cognitive decline at all. And also, and this will be very relevant when I compare these results to the anti-amyloid drugs, 30% ended up with a clinical dementia rating of 0. In other words, they would not be diagnosed with MCI or dementia. That's quite important. And then another research group who'd done a very nice trial on B vitamins and found effect, but relatively modest effect, wondered the same thing. So they went back to their baseline blood samples and they found exactly the same thing. Those in the highest tertile for omega-3 had a massive benefit from the B vitamins, and those in the lowest tertile had no benefit. So we're talking about synergy based on a very obvious piece of physiology, which is how neuronal membranes are made. And then a third trial, which had actually failed, giving 2.3 grams of omega-3 fish oils, which is a very decent dose. They wondered the same thing. So they went back to their blood samples and they looked at the homocysteine level and the baseline of their participants. Remember, above 11.5, you've got accelerated brain shrinkage. And they found that those who had a level below 11.7 had a massive clinical effect from the omega-3. While those with the homocysteine higher, for example, above 15.7, no effect from omega-3. So we have vastly underestimated the effect of B vitamins and omegas because we didn't understand they have to work together. And also what is so important in all of this is we are looking at subcategories. Not everyone has a raised homocysteine. It is not the only thing that is driving this condition. But it's certainly a very important one that we should be checking, and the one I have time to talk about. In China, there was a study that gave folic acid or DHA omega-3 or both or placebo. And once again, it was only the combination of the two that had the really high level of statistical significant effect in relation to cognition. And then this year earlier, one of our scientific advisory board members, Simon Dial, Professor Simon Dial, published a meta-analysis which again showed that it was studies combining the omega-3 supplements and B vitamins that have the significant effect. So now we move on to the headline today in The Guardian, which was Ray of New Hope, and written by David Cameron in the Times, was the beginning of the end of Alzheimer's. And we're talking about anti-amyloid injections. So this is a monthly treatment where you inject in the antibodies that attack the amyloid plaque that is a hallmark of Alzheimer's. And if we look, first of all, at the rate of brain shrinkage, this hasn't been published yet for the latest drug, but it has for previous ones. We're looking at 2 to 4% less brain shrinkage, although that is questionable. And I was showing you here up to 73% less brain shrinkage in those with high omega DHA given B vitamins. So that's the sort of scale of difference. What's being reported, for example, in Eli Lilly's release on the latest drug, donanemab, 2 weeks ago, is called the clinical dementia rating. And this is a subjective evaluation. I mean, it's not a bad evaluation, but let's face it, what you do is you ask the carer whether they think the patient has got better. And one of the problems, and this is very questioned by many neurologists deep in the field, is you may already know that 30% in this latest drug trial got brain bleeding, and 30% got brain swelling. So we're talking about significant adverse effects, and these are likely to be noticed. So in other words, we're talking about unblinding. And if you're on a trial where you hope, and you seriously hope it's going to do something, and then your carer or partner is asked the question, do you think they're any better? So, well, maybe. And it's an 18-point scale. And what was reported in the last 3 trials went from a 0.39 point drop, so less than half a point, to a 0.45 drop to a 0.49 drop. So less than half a point on an 18-point scale, which means answering 3 questions differently. And by the way, we are not talking about getting better. We're talking about the placebo group getting worse and the treatment group getting a little bit less worse. That's what the 30% result that's being printed in the papers mean. And we already know in identical randomized controlled trials, the B vitamins and the combination of B vitamins and omegas are a lot better. And by the way, there are 5 deaths under investigation, which is not insignificant. It means 1 in 500 people in the trials have died or are thought to have died because of the treatment. So in my view, and many people who work deeply in this field, the amyloid theory really is dead. And the British Medical Journal did a wonderful review on this. And in fact, Neurology Journal recently suggests that on meta-analyses, these drugs are actually accelerating brain shrinkage, not reducing it. But the point is it really ethical to go down this route and to encourage old people to join trials, which is exactly what's happening right now? So we then move on to tangles, p-tau tangles, neurofibrillary tangles. And by the way, in the latest donanemab trial, they actually selected people who had p-tau in order to get this effect. But what many people don't know is that raised phosphorylated tau is a direct consequence of raised homocysteine, which is a consequence of lack of B vitamins, usually malabsorption of B12. So, we should be considering homocysteine. And by the way, here's a recent study that shows that a raised homocysteine not only increases the odds ratio by 10-fold of cognitive deficit, but increases the risk of cerebrovascular effects by 17-fold. You don't often see an odds ratio of 17. So really, to sort of move to summing this up, there are 4 things that are really major drivers that we can do something about. One is sugar and carbohydrates. Another is a lack of omega-3, DHA particularly. Another is a lack of B vitamins, largely driven by B12 malabsorption. Another, which we haven't had time to go into, is the role of vegetables and fruit and antioxidants, but we have a debate tomorrow. So we'll see where that goes. So back in October, we invited all our scientists together to do a masterclass called Alzheimer's is Preventable. And it's recorded and available to you. So if you want to go, I've gone 1 inch deep into the evidence. If you want to go a mile deep from each of these scientists with their specialities, it's a 3-hour masterclass. Go to our website, click on events. It's there for you to watch. I think it costs £20 or £15 if you are a friend of the charity, which is how we fund what we're doing. And while you're at the website, why not do the test yourself? I'm going to show you how that works. There's lots of information in there, and we have a lovely manifesto which we give to people who become a friend of our charity, but you can also see it digitally if you wish. So there's lots of information. And basically what we're doing is citizen science. And I'm going to explain how that works, because what happens when you go and do the cognitive function test, which is not a questionnaire, it's an interactive thing, you then do a questionnaire, and the questionnaire works out where your risk is. And then you have a chance to join cognition, which is how we change behavior. It's one thing knowing what you should do, and another thing doing it. That's what signing up for cognition is all about. We specialize in helping you to change one step at a time until all your areas of risk are in the green. How? You pick one of your weakest domains. Then every other day you'll get an assignment, something to read, watch, or put into action. You'll also receive motivational prompts by text to motivate you and keep you on track. And optional Zoom groups to join with our health coaches, webinars to watch, and full support via the Friends Facebook group, our community of people like you committed to making changes to dementia-proof your diet and lifestyle. At the end of each month, you reassess your domain, then move on to change the next until you end up with all in the green, with your dementia risk index dropping close to 0. We even offer you pinprick blood tests to confirm you've optimized your intake of B vitamins, omega-3, vitamin D. That's what we've been up to. And all of this has been funded by people giving us 50 quid, friend of the charity. And I really, really hope that you will do that. But today is an incredibly special day for us because we are launching a pilot and specifically targeting GPs. Anyone, of course, can send their patients the link, foodforthebrain.org, do the test, fill in the questionnaire, find out where the risk is, and there's a whole lot of information that helps you to reduce that risk. What I just showed you, Cognition, the highly interactive program, it costs. It's £50 a year or £5 a month. That's how we fund being able to help make people change. So the pilot basically goes like this, and I'll be around today and tomorrow to talk you through it. If, for example, you're a GP, you can say, I would like to SMS my patients and have them do this. And we'll set up a URL, like foodforthebrain.org, Dr. Smith. And when you send that out, you will be able to track the progress of all your patients over time and actually see what changes. I'll show you how that works. They will also get a 20% discount on Cognition. Now, if you say, my patients will pay nothing, my personal view is it's good for people to have some skin in the game, you know? But if your view is, no, I want all my patients to have this for nothing, that's fine, but you're going to have to give us a little bit of money. And we've been researching this, and we haven't got to the bottom of it, because PCNs have a fund called the IFF Fund. And we put some notes on this in the foodforthebrain.org/PHC references section. So you may be able to get a little bit of funds to have all your patients do Cognition, the last part, for nothing. So this is a pilot. We hope you will join. And what actually happens once you join is you can log in and you can see who's done it, their age, their sex, and it's for the group, not the individual, the group. You actually see their cognitive function test, we hope, improving over time as their dementia risk index and their behaviors change. So this is a first, and we've been working very hard and greatly appreciate your support. So I'm going to end now by just showing you someone called Nodge and his wife Dorothy. Nodge was diagnosed in December with mixed dementia, Alzheimer's and vascular dementia. And he was given no hope at all. You know, join a dementia support group. So they went off and his wife found foodforthebrain.org. They did the test together, found out what his risk is. He was taking omega-3, but didn't realize you had to have the B vitamins. He went ketogenic for 5 days a month, dramatically reduced his intake of carbohydrates, went to bed an hour earlier to get some sleep, joined social groups. At the point in December, he kept being found in different parts of the house because he couldn't find the loo in the night. He was a computer programmer. He couldn't turn his computer on or off. He couldn't conceive of tomorrow. He was an avid gardener, but there was no way that he could plant his garden out. By March, he is so much better. He's joined a Morris dancing group. I'm not sure if that's good for you. He's back on his computer doing emails. He's planted his entire garden. And his wife, Dorothy, says, I've got my husband back from dementia. That's what we're talking about. Reducing brain shrinkage, reducing this assumed inevitable decline. It may not be inevitable if we can get started earlier and get the support of you supporting your patients. In your goodie bag, there is a card, and on the card, it gives you the website. Also, my name is Patrick, so if you wish to contact me, it's patrick@foodforthebrain.org. Thank you very much.